So this afternoon, I want to get super practical and try to tell a lot of stories. But obviously we always kind of start with looking at the life and leadership of Jesus, and then I want to land with some ways that our family has been practically living into some of these things. So this right here was like monumentally, like trying to wrap my brain around how I didn't know this growing up in church and all of the things. So this is what I recognize. For those of us that have been around church culture for quite a while, my personal experience is we focus a lot on the words of Jesus. And even like memorizing his word, we want to fall in love with his word. It's really good, right? And we even start talking about wanting to do his work and wanting to see his work lived out in the world. But the thing that I completely missed, like never even understood that it was a thing, was beyond the words of Jesus and the work or the works of Jesus is digging underneath the surface to understand the way of Jesus. And so what does it look like to fundamentally like reorient my life around not only knowing and learning and understanding the words of Jesus, and not only trying to take steps towards doing the works of Jesus, but actually living out the way of Jesus. And so what we see is the way that Jesus lived in these three dimensions super practically is that Jesus was really purposeful in the ways that he spent time with his Father. He was very purposeful in the ways that he shared life with his spiritual family and actually creating spiritual family, and the ways that he took this spiritual family and invited them to go on mission with him, right? And so here's the difference. It feels like for us kind of in churchianity in the Western world, it feels like even though this might sound and feel familiar, right? Like this isn't new, we see this in Scripture, right? But even though this might look and sound familiar, it feels like rather than actually giving up our lives and reorienting our lives practically to look like this, it feels like we've sort of compartmentalized this into nice, cute, pretty boxes that look a little bit more like the up dimension. If you're like super committed follower of Jesus in like North American church world, you might spend 20 minutes with God in the mornings, like, you know, listening to a podcast or maybe a little prayer journal time, but it's like 20 minutes in the morning, right? Maybe you might pray with your kids. If you've got young kids and you're putting them to bed, you might, pray with your kids before they go to bed. And the in dimension, like what does life with other believers look like? To be honest, most of the time it's like you go to church on Sunday and you listen to a preacher who's delivering you a message, and you hope that your nuclear family would join you at church. And that's kind of your life with other believers. Maybe you've joined a small group and you're a part of like that program thing that's once a week, time-bound from this time to this time. And the out dimension, for those that are super committed, like they're signing up for the service project once a year that somebody else planned for them to go do the thing at the park in the city or something, right? And so we've compartmentalized these things, and we sort of do Jesus light version. And we've kind of put them in these nice, pretty boxes, rather than having it be a lifestyle that we live into, where we're constantly taking steps towards reorienting our lives around the way of Jesus. So if it's not a compartmentalized thing, if we're wanting to kind of break out of that mold, what does it look like to kind of begin to take steps towards this becoming more of a life-on-life kind of relationship in all three dimensions? So life-on-life, the way that Jesus did life-on-life with the Father was, it's like being filled, for us, this looks like being filled with the supernatural power, right? Practicing his presence throughout the day, rather than just like a 20-minute little quiet time in the morning. What we see in the life of Jesus is constant communion with the Father. There was practical ways that Jesus pursued relationship with the Father. There was practical ways that he carved out time, right? So we see scripture verse talking about how he would often kind of slip away from the crowds. Sometimes he would get up early in the morning to pray. We see examples of Jesus, like climbing the mountain in the morning to get away from the crowds, to be with the Father. So there's practical pieces, but then you hear things like Jesus saying, I only do what I see the Father doing. And and we see these examples of how his time with the Father actually shaped the decisions that he made in ministry. Do you remember the story where Jesus is away praying and the disciples couldn't find him? Like he was nowhere to be found. And the crowds had already been gathering. It's like day 2 of, I don't know, mission and ministry time or something. And all the crowds had gathered because they wanted to see, again, more of the miracles that were happening the day before. And Jesus comes out. The disciples finally find him. They're like, Jesus, there you are. Everybody's waiting for you. And he's like, right, pack your bags. We're actually going to go to the next town. Because Jesus had been with the Father and got different marching orders. I feel like in my humanity, I would have been like, great, the people have gathered. Let's get them all healed, right? I would have assumed that if people are gathering, let's go to where the hunger is, right? But there's something about the way that Jesus prayed and his relationship with the Father that the disciples wanted access to. Because do you notice that it's one of the few things, the few specific things that the disciples were like, ooh, Jesus, teach us how to pray. It's one of the few things that they asked specifically, give me access to that. Because when you pray, something happens. Like, there's authority in whatever is happening there, and we want access to that. So Jesus, you got to teach us how to pray. And Jesus says what? It starts with our Father, right? So there's something about this life-on-life relationship that Jesus has with the Father that he's wanting us to figure out how to have constant communion with the Father rather than a cute little quiet time in the morning, right? Then we've got life-on-life with our spiritual family. What do I mean by spiritual family? What I'm saying here is that when we start talking about and using language of family on mission, and we're going to get to those components, what I'm not saying is your nuclear family, if you live in that particular life stage where you are either married or have kids living in your home, right? That is not what we're saying. What we notice is Jesus is a single dude. Jesus was never married, so he's a single guy. Whose, if you remember, his nuclear family didn't want to come on mission with him at first. They weren't about it. They were like, Jesus, like they're knocking on Martha and Mary's door like, ooh, like Jesus has gone mad. He's gone crazy, trying to like shoo him out. And Jesus is like, actually, my mother and father and brothers and sisters are all the ones who are here going, my spiritual family that's going on mission with me. So what we're saying when we start talking about building this spiritual family, what's interesting to me is that, first of all, Jesus was a single guy. The second thing that's interesting is that Jesus was fully human but also fully God. So he didn't really need other people. He didn't have to operate within community. He didn't have to operate within a family, and yet he chose to. He chose to build this spiritual family. And that was the methodology that Jesus used to seek and save the lost. So it's interesting. There's something significant for Jesus about his brothers and sisters, kind of like forming this radical shared life with him. And so you see Jesus inviting the 12, right? They get pulled into this covenantal relationship. You see Jesus inviting them to go on mission and ministry with him. They're walking along the road. There's conversation that's happening. There's meals together. They go to parties together, right? There's miracles that are happening that they get access to. There's Jesus flipping over tables and getting super angry that they get access to. There's Jesus getting real angry with the Pharisees and the religious leaders that they get access to. So they get to see things. They get up close and personal with Jesus. It's radical shared life on life. And so they get to see his prayer life. They get to see the way that he reacts in different situations, different leadership situations that are kind of tricky. They get to see the way Jesus treats those that the society has pushed off, the marginalized, right? And so they get so much access to all of those components that are lifestyle stuff, eating together, like playing together, having fun together, but also access to leadership stuff, prayer stuff. Like it's full on access to life, shared life. So there's something for Jesus that's about this vulnerability of pulling people in. And I heard somebody say it earlier, maybe earlier today. Pear maybe was the one that said it. This feels intimidating sometimes because we to be honest, leading programs is cleaner. Because you get to give people access to as much of your life as you feel comfortable sharing. Inviting them into your dust bunnies and your dirty underwear and your, like all of the dirty dishes in your sink and the fact that you actually live in your house, that stuff is a little bit more vulnerable, right? And so there's a reckoning for us to ask the questions of, do I actually have a life worth imitating? But also, am I willing to put this version of perfection down for a minute and actually lead from a place of vulnerability and weakness? Because, frankly, we all need Jesus. And if we try to paint the picture of, like, we've got it all together, that's not actually helpful for the people that we're journeying with, right? So there's something about this shared life. So if we're thinking about building a spiritual family and kind of upping the ante in the ways in which we share life with them, what does that mean for the people sitting around your table? How do we increase the ways in which we share life with those on our staff teams? Are there ways that we can kind of turn up the dial on that a little bit? So what does it mean for your staff team? What does it mean for the ways that you invite those that you're discipling into your life? How you give access, the athletes that you're investing in? What does shared life, what does this mean for the ways that you're inviting them in, the practical pieces of giving them access to your life? And then, what does this mean for those of you that have, that have a nuclear family that lives near you, whether you're married and have kids or not, or those of you that are sharing a house with roommates? How do we start thinking about shared life with those that we're living with or those that are our nuclear family? So we'll put some practical pieces to that in a minute. Then let's think about in the out dimension. We use the word person of peace, and that comes from the strategy that Jesus gave the disciples for mission in Luke 9 and Luke 10. We're not going to go into great detail in this immersion. We are going to dive into that together. But the strategy that Jesus gave the disciples when he sent them out in Luke 9 and 10 is he said, go house to house and go looking for the person of peace. Go looking for the house where his peace rests and it returns to you and da-da-da-da. So the person of peace strategy is really looking for people that are open to you, like you, welcome you, and serve you. You're looking for people that actually want to hang around you, and they're actually interested, they want to be with you, and chances are, if they're leaning into relationship with you, chances are they might want to hear the message that you carry, the good news that you carry, right? So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of the person of peace strategy. But what we're talking about is how do we begin to share life, not only with our spiritual family, but how do we start to think about sharing life with our friends that don't yet know Jesus? So who's included in that? Neighbors, like people that actually live in close proximity to you that don't yet know Jesus. We're thinking about coaches and athletes that don't yet know Jesus. We're thinking about the barista of the coffee shop that you frequent. The people that you see at the gym, if you're like, a gym person, clearly I'm not a gym person. We're talking about if you've got kids that are in sports, that's a seasonal thing where you're around those parents and those families for that season quite often, and you're cheering on the sidelines, right? There's something about having access to different kinds of families, right? And so how do we start to think differently about the people that we're trying to reach and begin to increase the ways in which we're sharing life with them? Now, here's the interesting thing about the way that Jesus did this. Jesus took this spiritual family that he built, and he invited them to go on mission with him. And so together they went looking for people who were open to God and were potentially open to starting to build relationship with him, right? And what did they do? They did things like heal the sick, cast out demons, preach the good news, right? There was actual, real showing and telling of the good news of the kingdom that happened as they went on mission together. Now, in many ways, collectively, as athletes in action, big, huge, wide, massive family on mission that spans the whole country. And then your team is a version of a family that's going on mission together. So you collectively are trying to reach certain campuses, right? And then we break it down even further. Probably you're going to start thinking about the athletes that you're discipling. How do you start to build spiritual family with the athletes that you're discipling? And how do you invite them to go on mission with you? Where you're not the one that's carrying all the weight of mission, right? You're inviting them into that. You're going with them. You're actually trying to help them reach their friends, not just you reaching their friends. Does that make sense? So we're trying to figure out, how do we imitate the model that Jesus gave us of building this spiritual family that went on mission together? Now, when I was, churched, growing up in church, evangelism was always kind of like put out there as this individual thing that individual Christians do all by themselves. Last week I heard a statistic that 98% of believers in North America will never have a spiritual conversation or share the gospel. 98%. So is evangelism all by yourself working? Not. Right? Not working. But when we look at the way that Jesus did things, he always sent them in pairs. Mission was a team sport. It was never meant to be done alone. That's what's interesting. If you dig in Scripture, look up Luke 9 and 10. Jesus sends out the 12, and then he sends out the 72 in pairs. There's something about mission being done as a team sport that feels significant for us. Where we go together. Where we're asking the question of who are we trying to reach, and we're helping each other reach those friends. So I want you to start thinking about the up and out triangle. Yep, it matters on a personal level, right? Yesterday we talked about that being the template, how Jesus shaped is our life. All of that is still valid. But I want to start to stretch your thinking and start to imagine, what might this up and out triangle look like in the context of an extended family perspective? So building spiritual family, not just with people that are related to you by blood, but the spiritual family that you're going to build that's going to go on mission with you, right? How can you start to live this up and out lifestyle with the people that you're sharing life with and going on mission with? Cool? So, what does this look like? We're going to begin to talk about some practical examples. In the upward dimension, when we're trying to figure out the upward dimension of how do we relate to the Father, this is going to look like things like worshiping together, reading Scripture together, praying together. In the inward dimension, this is going to look like, it's going to involve things like eating together, playing together, having fun together, beginning to pull people into discipling relationships and really pouring into those core kind of disciples. That's all involved in the inward dimension. And the outward dimension is going to be, an expression of this family kind of going fishing together, if you will. Jesus said, come follow me, I'm going to teach you how to fish for people. So we're going to figure out how to fish for people together with our spiritual family. Looking for people who are open to Jesus but don't yet have a relationship with him. And then once we've found them, we're going to start inviting them into our homes, into our spaces, into our lives, so that we can disciple them into the kingdom. One of the things that we found really helpful as we're starting to put some of these things into practice is predictable patterns. Predictable patterns is another way of saying, how do we not just have really good intentions of how we're going to live in the up dimension, the in dimension, the out dimension, but how do we actually look at our day and our time and our week and our month, and how do we actually set a predictable pattern of, or a regular rhythm of how we're going to start to live into these things. And so predictable patterns have been incredibly helpful what we started doing is we realized when we were just getting started in all of this, we didn't have a clue what we were doing. And it felt like we needed to experiment a little bit. And so for our family, we said, all right, leaders go first. Let's start with the people that live in our house and start putting some predictable patterns in place for the people that actually live in our house. And then I'm going to start extending an invitation to our spiritual family to kind of circle into those predictable patterns. Now there's not like a right way or a wrong way to do this. We just felt like we didn't know what we were doing and felt like we should kind of take some steps and then invite other people into it. So predictable patterns. The other thing that I'll say about predictable patterns is just because you decide that you're going to experiment with a particular new predictable pattern does not mean that you have to be committed to that from now until eternity, right? It's seasonal. It's another way of you saying, what's God saying to me right now, and how do I respond to that? We found every season we kind of have to reassess. Our family calendar looks a little bit different in different seasons. As our kids have grown up, their needs and our family availability and the ways that we spend our time is a little bit different. And so we've just created tons of freedom we're going to do certain predictable patterns. The value is we are super committed to living up in and out. Like non-negotiable, that's the value for us. The predictable patterns in which, I'll share some stories in a minute, those can change season to season, but we know that as a family and building a spiritual family, we know that we're committed to the value of living up in and out. So let me tell some stories. What does this look like? So in the up dimension, some things that we've done over the years. So this is not necessarily all at once. These are just some things that we've done with our spiritual family over many years. For a long time, we found having some way that we can read scripture together and pray together was really important. And we found that it wasn't always feasible. We didn't always live in super close proximity with each other. So as much as I would have loved for them all to come over to my house every single morning for us to read scripture and pray together, that just wasn't practical. And so we did a morning prayer call for years. I mean, 5, 6, 7 years. We did a morning prayer call every single morning at 6 a.m. The thing that I liked about the prayer call is that I didn't have to look pretty and put together because I had just rolled out of bed. So Zoom is great, except for, I would want to turn the video off because I am not showered usually by 6 a.m., right? And so the morning prayer call gave us an opportunity to read the same scripture together as a spiritual family and just to pray together. And this is what I'll tell you. It did not feel super spiritual every single day. It wasn't like this monumental, holy presence of God every single prayer call. But over time, these little investments over time become a very big deposit, spiritual deposit, right? So it was a simple way that we just took that step together. So morning prayer call was an accessible way to do that together. The other thing that we found super helpful is choosing to read the same scripture reading plan together as a spiritual family. We're just going to commit to all being reading the same thing every single day. There's tons of plans out there. If this is something that you want to try, whatever, pick one. The one that our movement uses is called the Moravian text. The Moravians are are they a denomination-ish? Something? It's a movement of people who, it was birthed out of a prayer movement. They're super cool. You'll notice up in and out in all of their stuff. There's nothing special about it. It's a Old Testament, New Testament, and a Psalm every day. And then they have a little super simple prayer that they have. So Moravian text is an option. There's all kinds of Bible reading plans. It doesn't really matter which one that you use. We would commit to praying together as a community. And that's obviously praying for each other, but also, man, we're praying for the people that we're trying to reach together. So having a list of the people that we feel are open to us and open to Jesus, and actually committing to pray for them regularly was a thing. We have had different iterations of a prayer wall in our house over the years. In our new house now, we have a whole big, huge wall in our basement. And our primary people that we're trying to reach are teenagers, and so it kind of works out well. But we have the teenagers that are kind of our primary spiritual family that's around our house a lot. We've had each of them write somebody's name on our chalkboard wall that doesn't know Jesus, that they're going to commit to pray for every single day. And so it's just one of those kind of predictable patterns for our family. More recently, confession, I hate fasting, like hate fasting. And yet, there's something in this season where I feel the Lord calling me to a different level of intensity, going after breakthrough for certain things. And so the Lord has really encouraged me towards a different level of prayer and fasting in this season to really contend for certain breakthroughs. And so my discipleship group fasts every single week together. So every Tuesday is fasting day for us. And the cool thing is like we're texting each other, and we're like, there's something about fasting day that feels a little bit more intentional and intense, that I feel the Lord saying stuff in a different kind of way. And so it's cool to do it together, again, for the same reason of then we're just not alone. So there's something about that that's been super helpful. So shared devotional life. Shared family life. When I think about a shared family life, there's probably some different categories of the ways that we've done this over the years. In terms of eating together, one thing that I notice is if you take food and miracles out of the New Testament or out of the Gospels, there's not a lot left when you're looking at Jesus' life, right? There is something significant that happens around the table. And so we just eat together a lot, partly because we just really enjoy food, but partly because we just want to be together, and there's something neat that happens around the table. Sometimes this is organic, sometimes it's more organized. In terms of eating together, our family does what we call open table once a week. So what we say is you eat, 21 meals in a week? So what if you picked just one of those to invite people into it? That feels doable, right? Feels like something that you could do. And so our family has a super high value on family dinners as just a connecting point in the day. And so we've picked one dinner every week that is open. We call it open table, which means anyone in our family can invite somebody over for dinner that night. For us, we highly focus on those that don't yet know Jesus as a way of folding them into healthy family. So open table is one of those. And then we super value meals together with our wider spiritual family. So there's a particular family that lives about 5 minutes from us that we're is our spiritual family that we're sharing life with, and so we have meals together with them quite a lot. The thing that I'll say about eating together is you want to make sure that it's lightweight, low maintenance. That's super key. So when we talk about doing meals together, we are not talking about, Martha Stewart meets Pinterest Thanksgiving feast with table decorations and everything else, right? We're talking super simple family dinner, right? Like very basic family dinner. And here's the reason. If you're going to take steps towards this in a predictable way, where you're doing this regularly, where hosting people in your home is a regular thing, like it's a lifestyle, it has to be sustainable over the long haul. So if you're doing things that feel really heavy weight, like it's a big production all the time, it's not going to feel sustainable over the long haul. So how do you do things that are super easy, super simple, that anyone can do it? And what that means is, those that you start inviting in, they see that you're not making it a big production, and at some point, multiplication means they'll feel like, oh, I can do that. Like, I can start doing that in my house too, right? So find ways to keep it lightweight, low maintenance. Sharing resources. If you read the Acts 2 passage, where the early church starts sharing in community, one of the things that you see them doing, different level, where they're like selling their houses and giving the money to like meet the needs of the community, right? That's a different level of sharing resources. here's what I've found is we've been doing the whole kind of building spiritual family thing for a lot of years. When you start sharing resources together, it ups the ante and it turns friends into family. Who do you call if you can't pay your mortgage? Who's going to bail you out? Mom and dad, right? It's going to be somebody that's a close family member. I mean, not saying that your family has money to bail you out of your mortgage, but you know what I'm saying, right? You're not going to just call up a random friend. You're going to call up the person that you trust the most, right? And so what we understand is that when you start sharing resources, when you start pooling together your resources for the community, it turns friends into family. And so there's all sorts of ways that looks, different ways that we've done that over the years. But we notice that it kind of has these different categories. So sometimes it's money, sometimes it is bailing somebody out of debt. Sometimes it's some sort of kind of helping. Like one of our people started a business at one point, and so collectively, as kind of their spiritual family, we sort of put in the fund to help them start a business. So things like that. Possessions, borrowing each other's stuff, right? The question with possessions is, what do you have in your hand, and how can you leverage it for your community? So one of the super practical ways that we're doing that right now, that we just had this conversation last week, is part of our kind of wider extended spiritual family is going to use our house. We're going on vacation, like a short vacation over the summer, and they're going to come and stay in our house as if it's like an Airbnb for free. So they're gonna come to Maine on vacation and use our house for free. So we're just leveraging our resources for the wider family, right? The wider community. So it's like, what do you have in your hand that you can leverage for your community? With our new house in Maine, we chose to put rather than having like key locks on our front door, we took those off and we put in the little code things. And what that means is, if somebody in our spiritual family needs something and we're not home, we can just give them the code and they can run in and get it, right? My house is their house. My stuff is their stuff. And so all the ways that we can make our things more accessible to our spiritual family, the better. Time. We've leveraged time and skills, all the things. When our family got sick, and our spiritual family was the ones that was like going to the grocery store for us, making meals for our family. All of that's kind of normal community stuff. Skills and effort. Our spiritual family helped us put a roof on our last house together. So they all like came over and were climbing up there and schlepping, all the things, helping us do that. Hosting one another's guests, all sorts of ways that we can kind of leverage our resources and our skills and our effort. Fellowship and having fun. I feel like it's hard to build something that feels like family if you don't know how to play together. So if everything is pressing into the high purpose area and you don't know how to just like let loose and have a blast together, it doesn't actually feel much like family. It feels more like staff. It feels more like a staff team that's leaning heavy into purpose all the time. So how do we just learn how to play? We've done that in both organized and organic ways. In our last neighborhood, when we lived here in Minnesota, we were really investing heavily into our neighborhood, trying to help our neighbors feel like family. And so some of the organized ways that we would do that is we started throwing a block party as a gathering event. Not because we were event people, but simply so that we could look for people of peace. And so having an annual thing that our neighborhood kind of threw a party together became a predictable pattern. There was other kind of community events that would go on our calendar. Those are things that were already organized that we just got to show up to, right? Other things that are more organic. Any reason that you can throw a party. So Super Bowl Sunday, when big games are happening, everyone wants to gather for the game, especially around food, right? So what are the simple ways that you can kind of lean towards play and celebration? Creating a culture of celebration. We found birthdays are another reason to celebrate. And so there's a family that I'll tell some stories of in a moment that like the marker of their family is birthday cakes. And so one of the things that they do all the time is they bake these like super unique, just super fun cakes. which to me would feel like heavy lifting, but to them feels lightweight, low maintenance, right? And so creating this culture of celebration has just kind of been a fun way for them to play together. My advice about any of these predictable patterns. So you can brainstorm your own ways that, how do you kind of increase shared life together? But my encouragement to you is whoever your spiritual family is, start small. So take a step and try out some different, try out a predictable pattern and see how that feels. And you can always make adjustments to it. My other thing that I would suggest, so rather than trying to introduce 8 new predictable patterns into your life, that will feel like a lot of adjustment. So start small and pick 1 or 2, right? The other thing that I would say is bring those that are in your spiritual family in on the idea formation of what spiritual or what predictable patterns feel fun. If you are trying to say, hey, here's what we're going to do, and they don't want to do it, it's not going to feel fun anymore, and then it's just going to feel forced. So involve the spiritual family in kind of making some of those decisions together. Some of you that are single and you live with roommates, you might start thinking about how do we go from roommates to feeling more like family? What are some predictable patterns that we could try, right? Do you want to start saying once a week or a couple times a week, we're going to choose to eat together and have really prioritized meals? Are you going to introduce some prayer time together? So start thinking about who is your family and what are some predictable patterns that would help you function a little bit more like spiritual family. Let's talk about the out dimension. So very intentionally, we're talking about a shared missional life. So not just your personal missional life, but what does mission look like in the context of your spiritual family going on mission with you? So how do you build this spiritual family that's going on mission together? So for example, some of the athletes that you're discipling, you're going to begin to fold them into family, right? Perhaps you're going to help them reach their team. So perhaps you're leveraging your spiritual family to help them reach their people of peace. Does that make sense? So one of the questions that we always have people ask is, who are you trying to reach? Because mission is a who, not a what. And oftentimes we start with, when we want to kind of grow some evangelistic mission in our life, a lot of times we'll start with asking the question of what are we going to do, without first understanding who we're trying to reach. And then it gets weird, and then it's more focused on the activity rather than the people. And so if you can figure out who you're trying to reach, that's super helpful as a starting place, and then you can get all sorts of creative with how you're going to reach them. A fun kind of exercise that I would encourage is, we call it an Oikos Map. So how do you, with those that you're discipling or your spiritual family, basically have them make a list of every single person in their life that doesn't yet know Jesus. And have them start committing to pray for those people together. And then you can start to see, is there overlap, right? Are they all on the same team? Or is your spiritual family going to commit to reaching your neighbors, and they're going to help you reach your neighborhood? Or kind of who are you trying to reach, and then how do we get creative with trying to reach them together? Once you figure out who you're trying to reach, you can start to invite them into your predictable patterns. So identify your who. Some of the ways that we've sort of tested out or we've done some gathering events is we start thinking about, with the people that we're trying to reach, what would they come to? What would gather them? Do we go to where they are, or do we try to invite them to where we are? We've done all sorts of ideas. I'll show you pictures in a little bit of some of the cookouts, the game nights, the popsicles on the porch. When you start having some people of peace, so people that don't yet know Jesus, but they're leaning into relationship with you and they're kind of intrigued and interested, part of the job, part of the beauty of going on mission together is you can start to discern with your spiritual family and kind of take the spiritual temperature of your people of peace. So what do they need next? Where are they at? Are they super far from God and they're just sort of leaning in? Or man, is it ripe? Are they ready for some spiritual conversation? And so the beauty of going on mission together with a family is it's not all on you. You get to discern that with other people who have different gifts than you, right? So you get to lean on other people's gifts, which is a beautiful thing. Top tips. So we kind of already talked about starting small. Don't try to introduce 8 new predictable patterns. Start with 1 or 2. The obvious thing is, if your life currently feels full, and as we're talking about predictable patterns for up in and out, if this feels super overwhelming and daunting for you, that means that you're probably going to have to say no to some things and cut some things out, stop doing some things in order to make room for, again, I use the language, reorienting your life around the way of Jesus. The word reorienting assumes that you've got to shift some things around, right? So reorienting your life around the way of Jesus. Keep things lightweight, low maintenance. That's a huge high value for us. Again, because you want it to be sustainable for the long haul. This is not missional activity. It's missional living. It's a lifestyle. So you're going after living this way, like for the long haul. The actual things that you do can change, in season, but the value of living a missionary lifestyle is a lifestyle. It's not an activity. And then we already talked about, make it super fun, invite your spiritual family into making those decisions, coming up with ideas together. Pictures. So this is a friend of mine in Boston, and they decided, this particular family moved from Michigan to Boston, and when they moved to Boston, they realized they're now in a new city. They want to start living on mission together, but they also don't have any friends. They don't know anybody. And so they're just going to start inviting lots of people over to dinner to see kind of what sticks. Simultaneously, they started doing, have you guys heard of Rover.com? It's like Airbnb for watching dogs. So they started watching other people's dogs, you make a whole profile and people select you to watch their dogs. And so they have so many funny stories of, high maintenance dog owners. But they started these Monday night dinners, and sometimes their Rover.com people would come and either drop off or pick up their dog, and they would just invite them to stay. Or they would invite neighbors over, or they would invite, whoever. And over time, what happened was, this was their open table. Over time, what happened was they started having some regular people who kept showing up, right? So lots of random invitations turned into regulars that started showing up around their dinner table. What they told me was, so they're in New England, and they said, they found that people in New England don't, if they come to your doorstep, it takes a lot for them to actually come through the door of your house and actually come inside your house. And so they said, on average, it took over 7 invitations for somebody to say yes to coming over for dinner. So what does that tell us? Keep asking. Just because somebody says no doesn't mean that they don't actually want to. There might be some barriers to overcome for them saying yes. So this is Monday night dinner in Boston. This is the same family. She said, for almost 5 years we've been inviting people to eat with us on Monday nights. It's not fancy. It's not a party. We eat dinner every night. You eat dinner every night. Community is built when we eat together. Isn't that cool? Yeah, spam s'mores. That sounds so gross. This is our dinner table. This is our open table. And you can see that it is nothing fancy. When we moved to Maine, we decided that now that our kids are teenagers, when they were little, we sort of, as parents, decided who we were trying to reach, and we invited our kids to help us reach our people of peace. Now that they're older and they're teenagers, we switched that, and we said, we as a family are going to come around you to help you reach your friends. Why? Because when they no longer live with me, I want them to know how to lead this stuff. So now we've switched it. Now that they're old enough, we're coming around them to help them reach their people of peace. And so we're trying to reach teenagers. And so this is our open table, and our kids are the ones that are doing all the invitations and the inviting to open table in our house. And one of the things that we found, this is so weird, but in Maine, there was a high percentage of these teenagers that had never had chili. I don't know why. It's a mystery. But, we decided chili night. And so we had, chili and cornbread and all the things. This guy on the far right, his name is Robert, and he is our key person of peace as a family right now. And Robert has a super tough home life. He lives about a mile from our house. Dad is a drug addict, Mom is an alcoholic. When Robert goes home, Mom tells him that he's fat and he's lazy and he'll never make anything of himself, which clearly Robert is not fat. And so he's got all sorts of things emotionally that he believes about himself that we're helping him work with. But Robert shows up every single week to Open Table. Every single week. The other chairs are filled with other kids, but Robert comes every single time. This is my second week traveling, and so my family, with kind of Christmas and me being gone, we've taken a few weeks off of Open Table, and Robert asked my daughter Addie, "You haven't invited me over for dinner in the last couple weeks." And Addie's like, "Don't worry, my mom's out of town. Well, you can come next week, I promise." But here's what's interesting about Robert. What we found as we've sort of stepped into Mission in Maine is it feels like our community that's right around us, there's just a lot of broken families. So as we're asking the question, who are we trying to reach? And we're really trying to understand the people that we're trying to reach. How we do mission is shaped by what we're learning about our missional context, right? And so one of the things that we're noticing is, as our kids are learning the stories of the different teenagers in our area, there is a mess that's happening in these homes. Like, way more broken families and just really hurtful situations that are happening in these households. And so what we're learning is that good news feels like healthy family. And so inviting them into something that feels like healthy family is really kind of like I'm watching Robert melt into family. He'll come and ask me if there's anything that he could, he's like, we have this calendar. You can kind of see it on the wall in the upper right-hand corner. We have this calendar that's on the wall in our kitchen. And I am a busy mom. I go grocery shopping one time a week. I am not one that frequents the grocery store. And so I'll get everything that I need for all the dinners and all the food and all the teenagers coming over and all the things one time a week. And so I make a list of all the dinner options. I don't assign what nights we're having what, but I'll just make a list of, this week's dinners. And Robert comes up and he sees this the first time he's at our house, and he's like, "Why do you have a list of dinners on the wall?" And Addie's like, "Because we eat together every night." And he's like, "Oh, do you want to know what I've had for dinner this week? Hot Pockets and ramen. We microwave everything." So family meals is not a predictable pattern that he is used to. And when I'm watching, again, he's like melting into family. He'll come in the kitchen and he goes, "Can I help you? Can I help you cook?" We were having tacos one time, right? I'm intentionally making it very simple and lightweight, low maintenance. And so tomatoes had to be cut. And he's like, "I'll cut tomatoes." I was like, "Okay." He's like, "You're gonna have to show me how. I've never cut a tomato before." I love it. I love that he's learning simple things at our house and just wants to help. So Robert is a key person of peace for us, and I feel like he's ripe for good news. So that's really fun. Popsicles on the porch. So again, this is another thing of who are we trying to reach and what does it look like to gather them in very simple ways that helps us look for people of peace. So this particular family lives outside of Detroit, Michigan, in one of the kind of neighboring towns, and they wanted to start gathering their neighbors. And they were imitating a story that they heard of somebody who was hosting happy hour. I don't know, one night a week they would host happy hour. And they're like, can't afford the alcohol, right? Cannot afford to serve our neighbors every week with such things. So instead they did popsicles, like the really cheap ones that are like the freezy pops. And they put them all in coolers and invited their neighbors over for popsicles on the porch, and they showed up, right? Funny. This was a Halloween experiment. This is in our old house here in Minnesota. we recognized as we were trying to reach our neighbors, our particular neighborhood was like wild about Halloween. And so they would, like wild about Halloween. It was like a party. They would get out four-wheelers and have trailers that they would pull behind four-wheelers that were all decorated with heaters and lawn furniture, that they would pull their kids around the neighborhood to go trick-or-treating. It was wild. And so what we decided that this was the one night a year that my neighbors came to me. I was not about to be weird and turn off my lights and hide in the basement and decide that this is an evil night, right? I was like, my neighbors are all out having a party. You better believe that I'm going to not even just open the door and give them candy and close the door again. We're going outside. And so our experiment was, let's buy one of those metal fire pits and let's put it in our driveway and let's have a bonfire in our driveway because all the kids are out trick-or-treating and everything else. And so let's sit around the fire. I made like hot apple cider and got like the drizzle to put on top and all the things. And so as the kids would come trick-or-treating, what we noticed was I mentioned the block party, so we would have this like very simple block party. And we noticed that some of our people of peace that came for the block party were like, "Ooh, cool! This is really fun. We're gonna like finish the loop with our kids, and then we'll come out and hang by the fire." Okay, we'll be here, right? We're just looking for ways to be present and to gather people. Do you know what happened after 10 years of investing in our neighborhood doing simple things like this? Our neighborhood, we had neighbors that told us when we moved into this neighborhood, they didn't know anybody. And after we started doing simple things like this, year after year, there was like community that was built. And when we left, we no longer live there, but it's so fun to watch how they continue to love each other. That community continues even after we've left. It's so fun to see. This is culture change, right? It's a great example of presence changing the culture over time. Also, if you drive around this neighborhood, our old neighborhood on Halloween, you'll see 75 bonfires in driveways. It's pretty fun. This is our new house now. This is our prayer wall, and the teenagers writing people that don't know Jesus that they're going to commit to pray for.